Normally we'll start right at 11 or as close as possible, but because it's the first day and some people might be having difficulty finding the room, I'll wait a few minutes. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, everyone's in the correct class, right? CGS1821? Okay. Let's make sure this is still streaming. No dropped frames, perfect. And again, everyone sit up just so I can see everyone has masks. Everyone's good? Okay. So again, regardless of county orders or whatever, state orders, the IRSC policy is that everybody on every campus has to wear masks. And again, if for some reason yours breaks, I have a few here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Dr. Bakley. I don't think I think most of you are kind of new to the college. Has anybody had me for any other classes? Okay, a couple people. So, and I think most people in here are digital media students, correct? Is there anybody who's computer science or something else? What's your major or area? Science. Okay. Yeah, so so mostly digital media, and then everyone, I usually get a few computer science. So this class is about making websites. Well, let me go through the other introductions and then the boring stuff, and then we'll talk about websites. So I'm Dr. Bakley. A lot of people forget how to pronounce my name by the end of, the middle of the semester, maybe even by the end of the day. So if you forget, you can just call me Professor. That's fine. It's pronounced like the words bake and Lee, so Dr. Bakley. But again, if you forget, just call me Professor. I do have, my office is on the 4th floor of this building. And I do have an office phone, but the chances of you getting a hold of me on my office phone are very, very low because I'm just always doing things. I teach a lot of classes. I have a lot of meetings, a lot of stuff going on. So I always tell people the best way to get a hold of me is just by email. And then if you don't hear back from me, let's say in a day or two, just send me another email. Either it got lost, or there's some days where I might get just this flood of like 30 or 40 emails that happen sometimes, like right at the beginning of the semester. I just get a lot of questions all at once. It might have gotten missed, so just resend it. As far as emailing goes, you do have to use Rivermail. Okay, everyone knows how to get into the Rivermail. Now, so that's the official policy of the school is Rivermail for everything. I can't discuss anything grade related or personal at all unless it's through a Rivermail, because obviously what somebody could do is they could create a Gmail account with your name and just say, hey, I'm the student, I want to know the grade, my current grade or something like that, so I can't do that. Now, sometimes if it's something very generic, that doesn't really matter who knows. Like, for example, if you're like, I don't understand sentence 2 on this assignment, can you restate it? In that case, it's, not a big deal. But anything that involves you, your grade, any personal information at all, and I'm very strict about that, it has to be through Rivermail, because I'm guessing you probably wouldn't appreciate it if, like, somebody tried to impersonate you and create a Gmail account and I told them all your grade information. You probably wouldn't be very happy with that. So it's really for your own protection. It can get annoying, but just please, everything through Rivermail. Before we talk about the actual content of the course, let's go through the basics, the grading scale, standard grading scale. You have a midterm and final, which are going to be multiple choice. If anybody's taken other programming classes with me, most of the time I'll do programming exams. So if you take the senior version of this course, CGS1821, I'll do coding exams, but since you're new to the subject, I'll do multiple choice exams. Now you'll notice that the assignments, that's the bulk of the grade. So what do the assignments consist of? The assignments are generally like coding exams. I'm sorry, not coding exams, coding assignments, kind of like project-based. So the assignments aren't going to be multiple choice quizzes or anything like that. We'll do some coding examples in class, and then the assignment will be based off of that. It'll make sense once we get started, but the reason I do that is because some people just get test anxiety, and with the assignments, I generally give you 1 to 2 weeks, depending on where we are in the semester. If it's a more difficult assignment, 2 weeks. If it's something simple, 1 week. And that makes it so that even if you just do terrible on tests, you're just not a good test taker, you can still pass the course. Okay. Now, one thing I do, we'll talk about this as the semester goes on, I do take cheating extremely, extremely seriously, and the assignments really have to be done. Let me think how to say this. So the assignments are going to be your own work. So it's not like you can get together with another person, both collaborate on one assignment, and then turn that in. You can't do that. And that, for some reason, that's often a surprise to people. I thought that was kind of standard, but you have to do your own assignment. Now, if you're struggling on a concept, you're welcome to talk to other students in the class, but at the end of the day, that work has to be your own. Does that make sense? So don't violate the spirit of it. The spirit of it is that it's your own work, because otherwise, this idea of being heavy on the assignment weights, that doesn't really work, and then I'll have to switch over to exams. So if I see a lot of people cheating, I can always change this grading scale if I need to. So just please, please, please do your own work. Again, you're allowed to consult other students, but at the end of the day, that needs to be your own work that you're turning in. So you can't just get a bunch of people together and each take a little part of the assignment and then turn one thing in. It's not really a group effort. Okay, so any questions on that sort of stuff? So that also means that, okay, gotta make sure to do attendance. That also means that you don't have attendance grades, you don't have participation grades, discussion board grades, those sorts of things. This is your grading scale. It's the assignments, midterm, and final. The reason I like to do this grading scale is because my goal is to teach you how to write HTML code and make websites and CSS code. And all that extra stuff isn't really important to me. It's just like whether or not you show up to class, that's sort of assumed because you're adults and you can manage yourselves. If you skip a bunch of classes, it's going to be kind of tough to do the assignments. So, or if you miss a bunch of recorded lectures, so My general philosophy is that I treat everyone like adults, and generally people tend to act like adults. So the more I get into like doing attendance grades, then people start to sign in their friends, or participation grades. People will just kind of say whatever thing they want to say just to say they participated for the day. So to me, really, at the end of the semester, my question is, have you learned how to make websites? Have you learned how to code HTML? Have you learned WordPress? Can you do CSS? Those sorts of things. Okay, so that's why I focus on this grading scale. So any questions on that? Everyone can get to this, correct? Everyone has access to Blackboard? Okay, so these read like a long legal document. I just kind of went over the things that are most people will want to know, but you're welcome to go through into Blackboard and just read the whole thing end to end if you want. So let's talk about the thing that's probably going to be a constant worry this whole semester is the pandemic, coronavirus. So I sent out an announcement about this. So really quick, I know it's kind of hard with the mask and everything. Can everyone hear me okay all the way to the back? And you can hear me clearly? It's not like overly muffled? Okay, and I'll do my best to project. And then everyone can see these screens okay, correct? The fonts are large enough? Okay. So we're in a unique situation where at any time this semester, it's very possible that they may say, hey, there's just been an outbreak, or maybe somebody, in the V building, there's like a local outbreak for even certain departments or something. And it's very possible that at points in the semester they may just have quarantine periods or periods where they say, okay, the whole college is closed. So we have to be prepared for that. So normally I actually don't really record this class because it's a pretty straightforward class, and we'll go over to the content in a minute. But out of all the classes I teach, this one tends to be the most straightforward. I tend to get the fewest questions out of this class. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy necessarily. It just some of the other programming classes can be a little bit more confusing. So, but obviously with coronavirus, everything automatically becomes more difficult. So I am recording this class. I realize that some people may not feel super comfortable coming onto campus. Like maybe for the first day you're okay, but maybe there's a local outbreak in St. Lucie County and you don't feel comfortable anymore. So I'm not requiring in any way for you to show up every week, but I have some requests. So first of all, you have to have a computer at home that works and an internet connection that works. That may seem obvious, but during regular semesters where we don't have anything going on like this, I get people telling me that they, that say they're taking an online class and they have a computer that's acting up. So that's a very important thing. If you're going to not show up to classes certain days, you have to have those things. Okay. Now this one, so that one should be fairly obvious, but I just have to state that because for some, it actually does come up more often than you'd realize. This next one may seem a little bit strange, so let me explain it. So you have to have access to 2 screens. What I've noticed is that a lot of people who do gaming actually already have dual monitors. How many people have dual monitors at home on your computers? Anybody? Do you do gaming? Is that your reason? Yeah, so I think that's very common with people who game. But I've noticed it's actually becoming, for people who just have a laptop, it's actually becoming less common. So an alternative, and you'll see me babysitting this every once in a while. I just want to make sure the stream doesn't drop. You'll notice that I'm not streaming this in Collaborate or Zoom or one of the other technologies. I very specifically choose YouTube because what I've noticed is that a lot of the smart TVs have a YouTube app. So either if you have, like a lot of the Samsung TVs, I think most brands probably have something built in these days, right? Even the low-end TVs, even like, anyway. But then there's also the external devices where there's like Chromecast, what's Amazon's Fire TV, I think, I think even Apple TV. Has anybody in here ever used those, the YouTube apps on those that you're comfortable? Okay, if you haven't, I imagine most people, how many people in here have either a smart TV or one of those devices? Show hands. Apple TV or anything? Okay. A few people. So what you can do is on your computer, do the actual classwork, and then on your TV or second monitor, watch the lecture. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of the examples we do in class will be coding examples. The idea is to replicate this in-class experience. That on the projectors, which at home might be your TV, I'm going to be going through some code. I'll explain the concept, I'll write some code, and then what you do is on your own computer, the computer you're sitting in front of, you'll write that same code. And there's a lot of reasons I do it like this. Theoretically, you could just copy and paste the code, but you don't really learn anything. There's just something about typing the code, especially because a lot of these, so HTML and CSS will use a lot of kind of funny characters that you're probably not used to, curly braces, angle brackets. And there's just something about getting used to typing that code in muscle memory. There's just something, I don't know what it is in that process. So it's like you have to go through and type the code. You can't just copy and paste it because it defeats the purpose. And so at home, you've got to be able to replicate that to where you've got the lecture on TV, and then on the computer in front of you, you're going to be typing the code. Okay. Is everyone clear about that? And I think for the most part for this class, it seemed like everyone showed up, so I'd imagine most people didn't, if anybody took advantage of this. In some of the other classes, I did have some people take advantage of this because maybe they just didn't feel super comfortable. I think with this class, this one's a little bit different because they had online sections of this, right? That if you really wanted to, you could have taken this online, I think. So just out of curiosity, I've actually been asking all my classes this. I'm kind of curious because they did offer online sections to most of the classes. What are your reasons for taking this as a live classes versus online? I've been kind of hearing the same themes over and over, but I'm just curious your own reasoning. Anybody? Yeah, in the front.
I think it's still like better showing up because I feel like I could understand it more when it's someone from the teacher.
Yeah, that's sort of what I've been hearing. So I don't know if you heard, but the answer was basically there's just something about being in a classroom and having it in front of me and being in at a live lecture that you just understand more than being on your own for online. How many people would agree with that? Show of hands. Most people. Okay. So, what's that?
I just enjoy being on campus.
Yeah, it's kind of nice too, just to.
Get out of the house.
Yeah.
Did anybody experience that in the spring and summer where you're doing online for everything and you might spend like days after days just at home, especially if maybe you lost your job or you had to work from home? Anybody experience that? Yeah, it gets kind of old. I've actually, because I've been writing software most of my life, they tend to be very lenient with writing software at home because a lot of times there's no reason to physically be in the building, and I've experienced that where at some point you just got to get out. Like if you spend multiple days in the house, maybe some people who are like really into playing video games, you've just done that naturally or something. But if you just spend, not to pick up people who play video games, that was just the first example that came to mind. Yeah, there's just something about being out of the house and going to a place. And this is a study technique that I've used in the past, is that I heard it a long time ago, and a lot of these things aren't scientific. It's like half the stuff they tell you about psychology and school and studying aren't real. But to me, this one intuitively has worked, is that if you're studying, try to change up the location. So if you have a desk at home and maybe it's just something you have to read over, like a book for a history class, maybe go outside, read it in another room or something like that. Just there's something about studying if you change up the locations that helps you study a little bit better. So, okay. Anyway, enough about that. So any questions on anything coronavirus related?
I was wondering, like, how are we going to access the recordings?
Oh, so there'll be, so what I'll do is I'll add a link after this, so I just didn't get to it. But see how there's all these things all onto the side? You actually see there's, I haven't added it yet, but so within, let's say, an hour after class, what I'll do is I'll send out an announcement. And then I guess the very last thing is, because this is such a new virus, if you watch TV, you'd think that everyone knew everything about it, and if you talk to people, the honest answer is that there's still a lot of unknowns. People have tended to seem very overly confident about a lot of things that we just don't know yet. Certain things just take time. If you take another thing that's been around for a long time, say like influenza, they've had many, not just years, generations to study the flu. And even then they don't know everything about this. This thing is like brand new. And all I can say is, regarding class and other things, watch out for yourself. If you feel uncomfortable in a situation, even if, say for example, there's not a mask order or something, if you just feel comfortable wearing a mask, wear a mask, and just look out for yourself, because there's been situations, and I don't want to get into any specifics, but already with this where we got one piece of information and then it turns out not that long after the information was wrong or incorrect. And so just use your common sense, use your critical thinking skills. If a situation seems dangerous, look out for yourself. And also, please just be respectful of others. Keep in mind that we're all in this classroom together here, and so it's nice that they've opened up the school. I really think it's nice to give you the option. If you want to come to class, come to class. If not, you can take online classes. And I am glad I am teaching live classes, because I want to give everybody the opportunity. I'm sure if I made a big deal about it, I could have gotten certain things put online, but I wanted to make sure everyone has the opportunity to show up to a live class. But do keep in mind that we're all in this together. So if you put yourself in a risky situation and you show up to class and you have coronavirus, it may turn out that everyone has to self-quarantine. So just keep that in mind. Even if you don't give anybody coronavirus, you may have just messed up their work schedule and just everything in their life got turned upside down, because you may not have given it to them, but they may be put in a situation where they have to self-quarantine. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because literally just before class, when we were waiting, I was reading a news article about all the colleges across the nation where people are doing off-campus activities and getting, even though there's all kinds of rules and regulations for on-campus, they're getting coronavirus off campus and then bringing it to campus. And I think the one they referenced was like University of North Carolina. They were open for like a week or something like that, and then they had to shut down again. So we've been very, very lucky. I think everyone here has been, very responsible and mature, and everyone's been good about the masks. I walk around, everyone's been good about social distancing. I hope everyone's been good about washing your hands. I have seen the various hand sanitizer stations. So just keep that in mind, is that look out for yourself. Don't put yourself into a situation, where you might feel uncomfortable. Just if you don't feel comfortable going to campus that week, again, I'm recording the lectures. And keep in mind, we're all in this together. So if you're experiencing some symptoms, just stay home that week. Watch the recorded lecture at home, because if you show up and then it turns out to be coronavirus, it may turn out that everyone has to self-quarantine. So just keep all that in mind, okay? So that's the last time I'm going to bring it up, because like I said, for the most part, everything I've seen on campus so far has been great. And that's like the famous last words type of thing, but everyone's been really good about masks, social distancing. Everything's been really good so far. So. Okay, enough about that. Let's get into what the actual anything related to any administrative stuff, I guess you'd say. Okay, that's the last I want to talk about that, because the whole reason we're here is to learn how to make websites. So there's a couple ways to tackle a course like this. So from the course title, you already know it's website development. So one way to tackle a course like this is, and you may not know this, but just kind of as a side note, to actually make a website, you have to do some coding. You have to do some HTML and CSS, which we'll get into what those things are later, but it's actually not overly difficult, but it is, some coding. One way is to use these tools that do a lot of the coding for you. And if that were the case, we could make some very cool websites, but one of the issues with relying too much on these tools and not learning fundamentals is that these tools change all of the time. So I'll give you a good example. So when I first started out working in IT many, many years ago, there was a product called Microsoft Front Page. And I'm sure probably, has anybody heard in this class about this? I'm imagining probably not. It's kind of old. And so this was one of those tools, and it's kind of a silly name. They call them a WYSIWYG, which stands for what you see is what you get. And what they realized is they said, well, a lot of people don't really like coding web pages from scratch. So what we can do is we can put a nice little user interface on this that people can drag and drop buttons and tables and all this other stuff. And after a while, so you see here, initial release 1995, final release 2003. And that was, so 8 years, but it was during the dot-com boom. So there are a lot of people who had no clue how to actually make a website, but they knew how to use Front Page. What do you think happened to all those people after Microsoft decided that they didn't want to sink any more money into Front Page and got rid of it? They have to learn a whole new tool from scratch. And a lot of those people migrated over to Dreamweaver. And then now we're starting to see these what are called content management systems like WordPress. I've seen far too many people migrate from tool to tool rather than just learning the fundamentals. Because many of these tools can make you a little bit overconfident. They can make it seem like, oh, wow, I was able to get a really cool looking web page up and running in no time. And if you're running a business, you're running a restaurant, and your goal is just to get a website up and running as fast as possible, the last thing on your mind is learning fundamentals about HTML. You just want to, so in those cases, I can understand, a lot of people using WordPress and stuff like that. However, if your goal is to become a web designer, you want to learn fundamentals. Now, the tough thing with fundamentals is that you spend a lot of time on fundamentals before you get anything visually very interesting. Now, we generally spend most of this class working on those fundamentals. Unfortunately, the web pages that you create aren't going to look that terribly interesting because we just have a lot of these fundamentals to get through. But once you learn them, the fundamentals that so imagine a person can take two paths in 1995. They can say, I'm going to learn this new tool called Front Page, and say you're fresh out of college, and you say, okay, I'm getting out into the world. I'm either going to learn Front Page, or I'm going to really sink in the time, spend a little bit of time on these fundamentals. Imagine having that career 25 years ago and just jumping from tool to tool to tool, and it seemed like every few years there's something new that comes out, versus if you had just learned how to code HTML and CSS. Your career would have been much more resilient if you just learn the fundamentals. And that's the direction I like to take, is I really like to concentrate on these fundamentals, because over long periods of time, these fundamentals don't tend to change. People always say that technology moves very quickly, and it does, but fundamentals don't change. The stuff that I learned when I was doing a computer science degree in college, none of that's changed. We've got new things in addition to that, but the fundamentals don't change over time. And that's why I concentrate on fundamentals so much, because my goal is that after taking this class, 30 years from now, all these things, these fundamentals that I teach you are still applicable. Okay. So that's the direction we're going to change. That's the direction we're going to go, and that's the reason I teach the course the way I do, is because I want to give you long-term skills. So I don't think I have to go too deeply into what the web is. I think most people in here have used a website before, correct? Has anybody not used a website? I don't think anybody. I think that's sort of assumed these days. Okay, so let's very briefly, I'm going to go, so the first day I do a lot of talking, and it can get a little bit boring, but I like to sort of set the stage a little bit, and then once we get into, at the end of today, and as the class goes on, we spend a lot of time actually writing code. And that's more interesting because you get to interact a little bit more rather than just hearing me speak. That at some point you're just going to fall asleep. So Did I forget to unlock this? Yes. This is the one. So this is a little bit older of a link. This is actually, I found this the first year I started teaching here, so 2014. And it's pretty, I still use it because it's still pretty decent. I haven't found anything that really gives you a good sense of it. So if anybody's taking classes with me, you'll know that I like to go over the history of things. Not because I'm like a super into history, but I like to set the stage. Okay? And then things make a lot more sense if you understand how they evolved, because nothing exists in a vacuum. If you don't understand the history of something and you go to use a tag and you're like, why is that shortened to P for paragraph versus this other thing is called article? Like, things don't make sense. But if you know the history and you know kind of what they were thinking and the resources they were dealing with at the time, you're like, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Let me move on to the actual content and learning the content than getting stuck in some of these trivial things. So in the late 80s, there was a guy named Tim Berners-Lee. You'll see that his name come up a lot in this course. And he was a scientist, I'm pretty sure, I want to say a physicist. And he was working at CERN. CERN is that big particle collider that they have in Europe. I think it spans multiple countries. Like I think it's in like Switzerland and or CERN owns it anyway. And so he's working there, and he's a scientist. And at the time, there was a lot of things floating around, a lot of concepts and ideas. So Tim Berners-Lee actually didn't invent a lot of these. A lot of these things had been floating around for a while, a lot of these concepts that he eventually turned into the web. And there's other companies that are very good at this, by the way. I always like to use the example of Apple. To be perfectly honest, Apple doesn't invent a lot of new technology. They don't have a lot of things that they've created from scratch themselves. What they're really good at doing is taking these raw technologies and making them into something much more user-friendly and much more usable. Just to give a quick example, the smartphone. Think about what smartphones and PDAs were around before iPhone. Has anybody seen pre-iPhone PDAs? Yeah, the battery lives tended to be pretty terrible. The screen sizes weren't great. They were very low-quality screens. They didn't have touch screens, or if they did, they would have a stylus. But they kind of put it together in a much more usable product. Tim Berners-Lee sort of did the same thing. So if you're a researcher, so let's just take, I'm on Google Scholar. So this is actually great. This is a paper from 1991. If you're Tim Berners-Lee, this is what you're working with all day. What we call a web page today, he would have called a document. And how many people have taken an English class where this is kind of like what your English papers would look like, your research papers, where you got a lot of text, maybe not so many formulas, but at the end you've probably got some sort of references section at the end, right? Show of hands, how many people have taken a research class or English class before where it's the general format, maybe not two column like this, but general format, yeah, most people. So this is what Tim Berners-Lee was working with at the time. And to be honest, well, we'll get back to this, but what are you seeing? Lots of text, maybe some tables, and some references at the end. Now, one of the very frustrating things with these references, say reference number 1 here. System identification theory for the user. Okay, it's got my reference. If I was reading this research paper and I said, that seems kind of like an interesting thing that they referenced. Let me look into that a little bit more. What would you have to do? You'd have to go down to the references, find the journal that it was published in. If it was an electronic journal in the 90s, you were in great shape, but they didn't have many of those in the 90s. You'd still have to go to that specific journal and pull up the paper. Otherwise, you'd have to go down to your library, hope that they subscribe to that journal. If not, they might have to get an interlibrary loan. So to be able to get to another document, let's use this term document. So I'm on a document, and I need to get to another document. It could be a very, very labor-intensive process that may take days or weeks. And at the time, the internet had been created. So the internet, this act of computer networking, taking a bunch of computers and connecting them together across the country and across the world, that had been around since the late 60s and 70s. The internet had been around for a while. He wanted to build on top of that and said, okay, I've got all these documents, and I want to be able to instantly go to another document. I want to be able to take my mouse, and rather than having to go through this whole process of reference number 1 here and taking days or weeks to track this down, I should be able to just click this and instantly go to that document. That term's called a hyperlink. Now, hyperlinks had been around already, but kind of in a limited manner. Now, he wanted to combine a couple of things: the internet, putting documents online, and hyperlinks. So really, the main contribution of the web is this idea of hyperlinks, that I can get to other documents instantly. Because people had already been publishing things online. They had already taken, essentially, magazines and newspapers and made them electronic. But the ability to jump around from document to document, or what we today call web pages, that was kind of a big deal back then. And we don't even think twice about it. It's like I go to a site, I just start clicking around. I might have clicked 10 links in the first 5 seconds of being on the site if I know where I need to go. Okay? Like if you log into Blackboard, you probably know you have to go to courses and then click the course and then maybe want to see the syllabus. Like you can click around really quickly. But that was, we take advantage of that. We don't even think about that. But that was kind of one of the big contributions of the web. And so he released this mostly to the scientific community, maybe a little bit to the military and research communities. And it became very apparent very quickly that this has some commercial use to it. So when he created it, these are the type of documents that he has in his head. Now, obviously, I don't know exactly what he has in his head, but this is essentially what they were working with at the time. Big blocks of text with some tables and pretty much it. Even back then, the images, we'll get into that, but transmitting images online at the time, because internet connections were so slow, that was actually relatively rare, sending out even these different images. And people very quickly realized that it could be commercialized. By the way, just as a quick bit of history, I don't know if anybody cares, but every once in a while I like to bring it. So when you're going through the history of tech and the history of a lot of things, a lot of these people intersect at various times throughout history. So Tim Berners-Lee didn't create all this on a Mac. He didn't create it on a PC. At the time, PCs were in pretty popular usage. He didn't even create it on a Unix type system. He created it on something called a Next computer, which was really revolutionary at the time. Has anybody heard of Next Computer before? The company only existed for like 5 years or something like that. Actually, I think they were called Next Step. Yeah, so let's look at the company. So who founded that company? Steve Jobs, right? Everyone still knows, I know he hasn't been around in a few years, but everyone still knows Steve Jobs, correct? So this is kind of a funny story. Steve Jobs, so what company did he found? It's not a trick question, it's what you think it is. He founded Apple, right? With the other Steve Wozniak. He actually got kicked out of his own company. Has anybody heard this story? It's really funny. I guess they just didn't have confidence in him, and when you have a publicly traded company, it's not really your company anymore. There's a lot of other people involved. They actually kicked him out of his own company. He didn't like that, and so what he created was this company called Next. And then Apple was like this close to being bankrupt. Apple almost went bankrupt, actually, and then they hired back Steve Jobs, and Microsoft actually pumped a bunch of money into Apple to help them survive, because they thought that if there weren't any other big computing companies around, that the government would go after them as a monopoly. And so they thought that they could just give Apple a little bit of money to keep them alive to get the government off their back. So kind of a funny story. But so Steve Jobs actually created this computer that he was for. He actually, at least he created the company. And it's funny. So this is all the way back in the mid 80s. If you ever do any iPhone programming, the original iPhone code was actually based on this Next code. It uses a language called Objective-C. Really interesting. The company wasn't around that long, but they did a lot of interesting things for the industry. But anyway, kind of just as a quick aside, like I said, all this stuff intersects at various points of time. That this Next computer, I'm sure this is at like a museum somewhere. But anyway, so early 90s, this is what he's dealing with, is these research papers created this system. Very quickly, this timeline kind of diverges in and out. Very quickly, businesses realized that they could start using this thing called the web for non-scientific documents. I can make a website, and any information I want to put on there, I can do that. And then what they also realized not that long after is that if I can send information, and we're not going to get into this, what are called forms. If I can send information via this website, people can do things like order things, make requests, and so on. But that's kind of a little bit outside of the scope for this. Now, think about the technology that was available in the mid-90s. Dial-up modems. So we're just going to use round numbers. So let's say a dial-up modem at the end of their popularity, 56K modem, we'll round down to 50 kilobits per second. Now, sending an image when you only have 50 kilobits per second is very, very difficult. The computers back then were very slow. The networking equipment was very limited. And so people generally relied on sending text. Websites were almost all across the board text, and then every once in a while you could sneak in a logo or something like that, but it had to be very low resolution. And so when he created this, he created something called HTML, and he wasn't really concerned with look and feel of things so much, because again, you're dealing with scientific documents. They're mostly text. But then the commercial world started to use this, and they were trying to use this tool that wasn't really suited for that. You can't really do layouts, look and feel, that sort of stuff, stylistic things. You can't really do that with HTML. He built in very, very basic things like fonts, tables, and so people were hacking layouts and tables were really never meant for that. And so at some point, they said, okay, well, this HTML thing is great for making websites, but it's not really great for making websites look nice. And so at some point in the either mid or late 90s, they created something called CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, and that's going to be the second section of the course. So the first section, we just learn about the web and how to make web pages and how to structure the text. The next part is that we start to look into CSS. Now, CSS can get very complicated, so we're just going to get into the basics of it, but over your next courses, it gets much more advanced. And CSS, the idea is that we're going to add stylistic things. So HTML, we say, is for the structure. CSS is for the style, how it looks. And then you'll have to take a JavaScript course, but JavaScript is considered the behavior of the site. We're not going to get into that here. This is interesting. This is the first Amazon iteration in the mid-90s. Can everyone see that? Like this is essentially what, the tools they had at their disposal. Again, basically a logo and then otherwise just mostly text. Almost nothing as far as layout goes. Even if they could do advanced layout, to be honest, those screens were so tiny back then. I would think so. If in the mid-90s, if you were, say, an office worker, your typical monitor would be anywhere from 13, maybe 15 inches would be very large. Now these days, they're so large and high resolution that we have much more options. It's almost to the point sometimes where you'd have trouble filling up the whole page because we have so much screen real estate. But back then, they really didn't have much to work with. So that's kind of the first iteration is Tim Berners-Lee creates the web. Companies start to pick it up. They know it's useful. They know they can do something with it, but they just don't quite know what. So during that time, you see a lot of experimentation. You see Amazon start to show up, eBay, PayPal. People start to talk about payment mechanisms. But they're mostly on dial-up, so they're relatively limited in what they can do. This is always just, I just bring this up because I think it's kind of funny. Just to give you a reference of how far we've gone. So everybody here knows the movie Space Jam, correct? So that came out in the mid-90s, and that was kind of a big budget movie back then. And so to promote it, that was one of the first, if not the first movies to create a website to promote the movie. Just for historical purposes, for whatever reason, they still keep it online. So you can actually, just to see, just in reference to what modern design looks like. So this is the Space Jam website. And this was actually pretty interesting at the time because this is mid-90s. They were able to take images and they kind of made them in a circular pattern. I'm guessing they might have, I don't know if they had to use, well, I don't want to get into the techniques that they might have had to use, but some of these things that they used at the time were kind of revolutionary because the tools were so primitive. Just doing this with pure HTML is kind of tough. One of the things that was very common back then was a lot of moving things on screen. I don't know for anybody, does anybody remember that era when people had things moving on screen all the time? There's like a running joke. It's the Homer Simpson website where you just put as many flashing, moving things on the website as you can put. Modern web design has become much, much, much more simplistic as far as, but to make things simple, a lot of times you have to actually put a lot of thought into it. It's very easy to make complex things. You just keep on throwing stuff at it. It's actually much more difficult to make something simple that still works correctly. And you can see there's not a lot of consistency between pages. Just go to one more here, see if I can. Yeah, you can see. Yeah, there's really not much here. How's the text? This is a stylistic thing a design thing that just, I don't know why it ever got popular. Can you read that red text? So red text on stars. It's a little tough to read, right? It's actually incredibly amazing in that time, in 25 years, and really this started about 15 years ago. A whole area of scientific research started to explode about the usability of websites. And people will actually, and I don't know if you do this in your digital media courses, what fonts to use and contrast ratios and stuff like that to make it readable. And you want to do it, you want to keep certain line spacing because your eyes are and eyes are good at scrolling like within a certain field of vision and narrow range. And there's just a whole field on text readability. It's really, really amazing. And there's actually some interesting tools that'll actually go through your website and say, okay, it'll give it like say a readability score or something like that for people with various vision issues. But anyway, so I'm gonna keep on going through this. I'm gonna go a little bit faster here. So that's the kind of the setup is that when we start to make web pages, we're gonna learn the fundamentals. We're gonna start out with HTML. And what tools did Tim Berners-Lee have at his disposal back then? Research papers. That's what he was dealing with mostly. And that's the type of stuff we're going to deal with initially is just big blocks of text. And we're going to learn how to structure those. So they started to commercialize. Then what started to happen in the late 90s, early 2000s? Computers got much faster. We started to see broadband. And so we went all of a sudden from 50 kilobits per second to 1 megabit per second, I think was considered broadband back then. Even not today, 1 megabit per second would be considered slow, even on a phone. So all of a sudden, in the very short amount of time, you've got internet connections that are 20 times faster. Same thing with computers. The computers are many, many times faster. And just for reference today, if I were to just go to, say, some company like Comcast, it wouldn't be unreasonable for me to, like one of those medium level plans to purchase like 100 megabit per second plan. So just in the period of, 25 years, it's amazing how much things have changed. And so all of a sudden when you've got fast computers and fast internet connections, there's a whole new world of things that you can do. You're not worried about how much code you're writing. You're not worried about, you're still worried a little bit about image sizing. You want to be smart about it, but just sending images, that's not really considered, like you don't have to, it used to be you'd have to put a lot of thought into that image and say, do I really need this image on the page? Now it's just kind of assumed, throw an image on there, just make sure it's sized correctly. Same thing with code. People used to put a lot of effort into trying to minimize the amount of code they write, and today you don't really think about it too much because internet connections are so fast, who cares, you know? And they keep on going through some other stuff here that's not really even related to the web, but you can see here as when we started to get really, really fast internet connections, all of a sudden now we can do video, okay? And so once we started to get broadband, we see all these video sites start to pop up. But anyway, enough of that. So this is to kind of take you through some history of it and sort of set the stage, is that the stuff we're going to be learning, as cool and interesting things as they have going on today on the web, we really have to start off at the beginning. We have to learn the fundamentals. We have to put our mindset all the way back into the early 90s when we had 56K modems and tiny computer screens and kind of that era of things. Mobile's not around yet. People don't have these very high resolution screens and so on. Okay, so enough of that. Any questions on the history? That's pretty much the only time we're going to do anything like that in the course. I just like to set the stage. So now let's actually go ahead and, so you'll see under in the class, you should see something called resources. If you don't see it, you might have to refresh it because I just enabled it. So I'm just going to refresh here. You see resources. And W3 Schools HTML. So we're not going to be using a book for this course. I'm sure some of you are happy that you didn't have to pay another $200 for another book for one of these classes. There's so much information about there about web design, making websites. It would be a little ridiculous of me to ask you to buy a book when there's just so much information out there on the internet for anybody to get. And this W3 Schools website's pretty decent. Some of the more advanced stuff isn't as good, but their fundamental stuff is really, really good. They've expanded a little bit to other things like learning other languages and stuff like that, but their core learning HTML stuff still, after all these years, remains really, really good. One of the nice things, your self button. And it's pretty cool because just to get started, you wouldn't make a full website in this or a full web page, but just to kind of get going, as they give you these different examples, there's always a little green button. So before I move on, everyone's at this site, correct? Everyone's at the W3 Schools site. And if you scroll down a little bit, you see this try it yourself. Okay, so let's go ahead and click this. So this is what HTML looks like. And let's make our lives a little bit easier. Let's just start off with this. Let's get rid of that line of code and let's just get ourselves down to this one right here. So when you create a web page, there's some extra information that the browser is going to want. But my goal is to, when you're learning this stuff, not to be complete. I don't need to explain every single thing. I like to introduce things in the order of importance. So what that means is sometimes you'll see something in front of you and I just say, don't worry about that just yet. And this is going to be one of those times. So I'm telling you that this code up here and this code down here, don't worry about it. It's going to be the same every single time for the first 6 weeks of the class. It's going to be maybe 5 weeks, something like that. But it's going to be the exact same every time, so don't worry about it. You're not going to have to type it out yourself. I'm letting you copy and paste it. Don't worry about this. All you have to remember is that your code, there's a tag here called body. This is where your code needs to be, in between here. Just do a double check, make sure we're still streaming. Perfect. Okay. So this is HTML. And the idea is we have something called a tag. And the way it works is that they occur in pairs. almost always occur in pairs. There's a couple of exceptions that we'll go over later, but 99% of them occur in pairs. And the way it works is that you start a tag, you end a tag, and the stuff in the middle belongs to that tag. So the stuff in here belongs to this paragraph. Now the general idea is that the stuff in between is meant for the user to see, and these tags, you're sending this to the browser. It's for the browser to interpret, the browser to make sense of. And the way you write these, and you can see these with other tags that we're not super concerned with just yet, is this, you have an angle bracket, the name of the tag, in this case this is P, short for paragraph, and then a close angle bracket. And then now to close the tag, remember it occurs in pairs, it's the exact same. The only difference, what's the one difference you see? There's a slash. Now, I'm going to get a little bit into terminology here because this is important. This is called a forward slash. This always people get this backwards a lot. So this and this are two different things. Okay, this is called a backslash. The forward slash is the key that, if you look on your keyboard, you should see the question mark. I want everyone to do that. Erase it, and then just add the forward slash in yourself, just so you get used to using it. Okay, and then anytime you make a change to it, let's say instead of this is a paragraph, let's just put in the course, CGS1821. Let's go ahead and click Run. And then whatever we type in shows up there. You have to be very, very careful in typing this code. If you make one little mistake, the code's not going to run correctly. Now, the tough thing with HTML is that they made a decision very early on. It was actually mostly Microsoft, that if your HTML wasn't perfect, if you write another language, has anybody in here taken like a COP 2000 or another programming class? Okay, so in most other programming languages, if one little thing is off, if I forget to put this angle bracket here, the code won't run. You'll just get what's called a compilation error. It'll just say, hey, something's off here. You need to fix it before I can move on. Unfortunately, I click Run, and it still runs. It still appears, even though there's a mistake in this code. What it does is it tries to do its best. Now, the reason this is bad is because you want to know about mistakes earlier than later, because these mistakes can appear 30 or 40 lines down from where you made the mistake, and then you're like, why isn't this lining up? And then you go all the way back, and it's because you forgot something with your paragraph. You have to be very careful about these. Now, these days we have what's called syntax highlighting. Notice that our tags are different colors, and as soon as I made that mistake, what did you notice at the bottom there? What color did the stuff at the bottom turn? Red. So this is kind of universal. Different editors will use different colors, but for the most part, red is like the universal. You made some mistake somewhere. So you get a little bit of help from the editor, but as far as the browser is concerned, it's going to do its best to create that web page. Okay. So congratulations, you just wrote your first web page. Now, this isn't usually the way we run web pages, though. What we usually do is we generate an HTML file, and then we run that on a computer somewhere. So the easiest way to do that, so again, like I said, this is very great and awesome for testing out small examples if you're trying to just learn a simple concept. But as far as day-to-day editing of creating a website, you're typically going to use a text editor. Now, there's a million of these different text editors. They essentially do the same thing. You just type in some HTML code, and then they may give you some extra tools like syntax highlighting and like a little color editor or something like that. But for the most part, they essentially do the same task. There's one that I like to use for this course called Brackets. It's actually from Adobe. It's an Adobe product. It's free. They don't really advertise it that much, which is very strange. It's actually pretty good, for the web at least. There's some other editors that are very popular, but for the web it's really good. You can see here, yeah, Brackets was founded by Adobe as a community open source project. So it's open source and free. You don't have to pay any money for it. The thing I really like about it, though, is that for this class, a lot of people are using different operating systems. So some people like to use Windows. We have till 12:15, correct? Yeah, okay, just making sure. I've run over on my time in classes before. Nobody said anything for like 10 minutes, and it's like, so I always have to ask now. I think everyone was too afraid to ask. The thing I like about Brackets is that it runs on Mac and Windows equally as well. It actually even runs on Linux pretty well, too. So let's do this. I think for the most part, this actually should be on your computers already. So if not, what you can do is click this download button right here. Okay, so if you have your own personal computer, again, you can safely download this. This is from Adobe, so it's not like from some sketchy site that you don't know what you're downloading. This is an Adobe piece of software. And if you're on a school computer, they have these kind of locked down to where you can't drag it into the applications, but you should be able to click download and then open it at least. So let's just take a few minutes to do that, because next class we're going to jump right in and we're going to start using Brackets right away. And I like to use this first class just to get everyone kind of familiar with it a little bit. That way you can go home, install it, check it out a little bit, and then next class we can really get started coding inside of Brackets. Okay, so while you're downloading that, let's just make sure that we're still streaming here. Perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly add, completely unrelated just because I thought of it. So I already mentioned that I don't do daily attendance, but the school does have a requirement that I have to take attendance once. And I think it's actually a federal reporting requirement. So what I'm going to do here is I added a link for attendance, and then you don't have to put your name or anything, just click the little submit button, and I'll even give you a free extra credit point for doing attendance. Just put it later in the week so nobody freaks out. Point. Okay, so you might have to refresh your web page for it to show up. So click refresh. You should see attendance somewhere here, and then just click that and then click submit. You don't have to. It automatically attaches your name. There's no way to. It's almost impossible to not do it correctly. Okay, literally all you have to do is click submit. So make sure you got Brackets downloading. Make sure to take care of attendance for me real quick, and then we'll just waste a couple of minutes while everyone gets going here. And then once it's downloaded, go ahead and click the download and make sure it actually opens. Now you may see some strange files because I teach another web class in here. I'll walk you through how to work around those in a second. Okay, show of hands, how many people were able to get it downloaded and opened? Anybody? Is it still downloading for everyone? What happened? I think you can just click cancel, and then I think it still lets you open. So if you just go to downloads and then click it, does it show up in the downloads? You can always download it again. Yeah, so you're not going to be able to drag it to the application. Okay, yeah. So if you see that application icon pull up, you just can't drag it over, but you should be able to double click it. And this is recorded, so if you want to try it home. Yeah, so just double click that icon. And it should open. Good. So we only have a few minutes left, so if just kind of follow along if you weren't able to get it open. This is recorded, so you can go home and go through that process again, and we'll go through the process again at the beginning of the next class, but we'll be a little bit more quick about it. Okay, so you should have brackets open, should look something like this. Now your code, you may or may not have code. This is from another class I'm teaching. And what I like everyone to do is make a folder. I usually suggest making it on the computer and at the end of class copying it to a flash drive, because sometimes if you're like working on something, you get your flash drive in. If you knock out the flash drive, it can corrupt the files. So what I usually say is put the folder on your desktop, work on it, and then at the end of class, copy it to a flash drive. Let's go ahead and make a folder for this class, CGS1821. One of the most common problems I actually see with people is not that they don't understand the material, that their work isn't organized. It's like they worked on something last class and then they try to finish it the next class and they can't find the files. So I try to keep you organized. And what to me, the best way is just by date. And that's how I try to give the examples. So what I'm going to do is I made the CGS1821 folder. I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder for today. So today's the 25th, so 8/25/2020. Now again, I'm going through this a little bit faster than I normally do, normally because we actually have more time. It's a compressed class, but also because this is recorded. So if I lose you at any point, we will do it next class, go through this process again, but I only have a few minutes, so I am going to have to move on. So make sure you make a folder, CGS1821, make a folder for today's date. Go ahead and open up brackets, and you should see a little button up here. Now mine says, yours might say getting started. Mine says 8/25/2020, which is the folder for the other class I'm teaching. If you go ahead and click it here, there should be a button that says open folder. And now what I want you to do is that folder that you're going to open is that folder that you just created, CGS1821, and then the date. So the idea is that any new files that you create will be put in today's folder. And it makes it much, much more easier to keep things organized. So I'll go through that process one more time. So click that button inside of brackets, open folder. Find the folder that you just created. In my case, it was on the desktop. Oops, zipping around here. CGS1821. Today's date. And then I can click select folder. Now you'll notice anything that you had in there was gone because now it's pointing to a new folder. So now what we want to do to create our first file is we're going to go to File, New. You can see here it's just blank. It's just waiting for some code, right? We want to take that code that we wrote earlier. Remember this thing that we wrote in the Try It editor? So go back to your browser, open up that tab. And then we're going to copy and paste the whole thing. Make sure to get it all. Don't miss anything. Like don't do like this where you're missing a single character. Just be very, very slow about it and just say, okay, make sure I've got every single character in here. The whole thing is highlighted. On Mac, I think it's Command-C, correct? So on Windows, it's Control-C. And then paste it in here. So I'm going to do Control-V on Mac. I'm guessing it must be Command-V then. Or you can do Edit, but I'm just used to the keyboard shortcuts. Now you're almost there. You're close. You've pasted in the code, but it doesn't know that it's an HTML file yet. Why doesn't it know? Because we haven't actually told it that. So for it to recognize it as an HTML file, what we then have to do is go to File, Save. And what you should notice is that it should automatically put you into that folder that we just made, which is really nice. That's why I do this, is because every time you save a file, it's automatically going to put it in the correct place. Now you can, if you click around, you can mess things up, but by default, it's going to put you in the correct place. And let's just say, so what I like to do is I like to name these EX1, EX2, EX3, for example, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So we're only going to do one example today, so it's going to be EX1.html. Make sure you put that .html. That's very important. That's how it knows it's an HTML file. That's what's called the file extension. So we're going to call it ex1.html. And then click save. And then what do you notice about the text? Is it one single color now? Or what happened to your text? Yeah, it got what's called syntax highlighting. It recognizes it now as an HTML file. It knows that you're working with an HTML file. So we're getting close. I notice it's an HTML file, but how do we actually view it? I've got the raw HTML code in my editor. Well, one way, and we're not going to use this in the class because I've noticed it just tends to confuse people. But we can actually just go to the file. I'm on my CGS1821 folder, today's date. I can bring it up. Not much to it, so we can do that. But what I like to do is they have a built-in web server. And if you click this little lightning bolt looking thing here, and it's just live preview, that should open up a browser. And it actually brings up a web server for you. It actually has a built-in web server, which is kind of cool. So why do I specifically like this feature? So watch on the left-hand side as I type. It automatically updates for you. You don't have to go through the whole process of finding your file, clicking it, hitting refresh, going through that thing. The web server automatically keeps your page up to date, which is kind of nice. Okay. And I know I went through that a little bit fast. What I would suggest is go through that process again at home. I am going to be posting the lecture very soon after class. Right after class, I'll make the playlist for the course, and then I'll rename the lecture. And then if you fell behind at all, even if you didn't, just go through that process at home again. Make sure you have brackets installed. It's a very easy piece of software. You just click next a bunch of times. It's from Adobe, so it's probably reasonably safe. Go through, copy and paste the HTML from W3 Schools, save it as an HTML file, run that web server, and make sure you can do that whole process, because that's going to be the general flow for every single class, is that we're going to open up brackets, do a couple things in W3 Schools, learn about some concept, take that concept, put it into brackets, and then do some more interesting, more complete examples in brackets as a full web page. Okay. So that's pretty much it. I've used up all my time. Any questions about anything? So the main thing is make sure everyone's taking care of your attendance. You only have to do it the first class. You don't have to put your name or anything. Just click submit. And then please watch, because this is an express course, not express, blended. There may be, since we're not meeting twice a week or for the full 2.5 hours, there's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to have to give you as announcements. So please, please, please keep up with those announcements. Make sure that a couple times a week you just log onto the course and click announcements. Just make sure you haven't missed anything. I usually send them out as an email as well, but just in case you're not getting the emails, please make sure you keep up with these announcements. And that's pretty much all the time. Any questions on anything? Okay, again, please be safe. Do everything you can to keep from getting coronavirus. And then if you have any questions in the meantime, go ahead and send me an email, and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. And look out for the recorded lectures